Welcome back to the World Power to X 2020 Summit. I hope you have enjoyed just as much as I have the high-level opening session. The time has come for us to discuss in more detail the market perspective. In the opening session, we talked about the local, regional, continental, and global aspects. The market perspectives at all these different levels is very important to consider for Power to X. Clearly, mathematically, X may be understood as representing the unknown. But beyond the unknown, Power to X represents the multiplicity and the richness of applications for a transformational switch, whether it is to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement or the broader 2030 agenda. To discuss and share the upcoming session, I'm very happy that we have Mr. Saïd El-Hadi. Mr. Saïd El-Hadi is the chairman and CEO of NAREVA. He's also the president of the Green Economy Commission at the General Confederation of Moroccan Enterprises. He has tremendous experience in top management positions, as well as an international expert in infrastructure, development, and public and private partnership setups. Mr. El-Hadi, we are in your most capable hands. You may start the session as you wish. We are not hearing you currently. Mr. El-Hadi, can you hear us? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayman. Thank you. It's my pleasure to chair this second session of the World PTX Summit after the outstanding and very rich high-level opening session that all of us have followed. The session 2 is to talk, as you said, about the market perspectives with the professionals with different various profiles. As you know, and I'm surprised by this figure, it's the hydrogen market is already a big market. We're close to the threshold of 200 billion USD in a couple of years. But now, as this was said earlier in the opening session, 99% of the hydrogen is out of fossil origin, and this has to change. And as you know, there is a growing importance of clean energy to meet the targets of carbon emissions and ensuring compliance with the global guidelines, namely the Paris Accord and other national and regional strategic goals. So I think the time is right to tap into the green hydrogen's potential and all the Power to X products in general to play a key role in clean, secure, and affordable energy future. So this session will highlight the market dynamics relative to the major factors driving the hydrogen and Power to X deployment. So the panelists will share their insights and forecasts for specific timelines about the Power to X evolution and share their views with different angles, production processes, delivery modes, demand share per sector, segment, technologies, applications, and regions. So it's my honor to introduce to you this panel of 6 distinguished panelists, as I said, from various profiles. So we have with us today, please just raise your hand to make sure that people recognize you. So we have Mr. Heino von Meyer, who is the head of global relations and networking at GIZ, International PTX Hub in Berlin, a new initiative that was launched at the COP25, and he will speak as a keynote speaker for this panel. We have Mr. Uvelal, I can't see him. Is Mr. Uvelal with us? Transport of the state of Baden-Württemberg in Germany. So he's a local government official. It will be interesting to have his own view, and I hope he will be with us in a few minutes. We have with us Saïd Moulin, who is the Director General of a government agency in Morocco, which is AME, Agence Marocaine de l'Efficacité Énergétique. But it is a global agency and government agency that is now in charge of promoting green economy in general. So Mr. Moulin has a 3-decade-long career, all committed to environment protection, climate sustainability issues. We have with us Mr. Kurt Christian Schiel is here. Mr. Schiel is the Managing Director of the Business Unit of Government and Society at VDA. VDA is the Association of Automotive Industry that is comprising German automotive car makers and also component suppliers. So again, it would be interesting to hear the view of professional in the car making industry and component supplier, an industry that has a big role to play in this transformation happening. We have also with us Mr. Samuel Alt. Mr. Alt is here with us. Mr. Alt is the head of research in energy and electronics at Siemens AG Technology. So again, we have a profile from the multinational technology provider in the energy sector and one of the leading technology providers in renewable energy. And last but not least, because she's the only lady we have in the panel, unfortunately, we have only one lady. So Mrs. Hanan Hamraoui, who is Hanan Hamraoui, she was here, she's here. So Hanan Hamraoui works at HDF France. HDF is an IPP, independent power producer, dedicated to utility scale clean energy, clean power. So it will be interesting to hear her perspective as a power producer. So let me give the floor to Mr. von Meyer for your presentation, please. We can't hear you. Maybe you're on mute.
Okay, I hope.
Now it's fine, yes. So you have 12 minutes for your presentation.
Okay. So, Excellencies, honorable participants and panelists, dear President El Hadi, thank you for this kind introduction, and many thanks to the Moroccan government, in particular Irizen and Badaiken, for the invitation to address this PTX summit. It's a great honor for me and for our international PTX hub, who, as you said, was launched a year ago at the COP25 in Madrid in the presence of Minister Aziz Gaba and Badaiken, and actually you were present there too. So in this session, we are asked to, if there is a PTX market, and what is the timeline for its development. My answer is no. There is no large-scale PTX market, not yet. But there is an enormous market potential to be developed, and Morocco is clearly well prepared as a front runner to become a major player, if not a champion, in this newly emerging energy market. And we've heard that in the first session already. And the timeline? Well, I will not give a single date. Over the next decade, however, the market will be ramped up and shaped by policy priorities, programs, and public interventions, stimulating both public and private investments and demand. And if together we manage to steer this transition in a sustainable manner, and by 2040, PTX will dominate, or at least become a major part in the global energy market, and then even without further policy support. So let me elaborate my views in 10 minutes with 10 points. I will not go through each of them now, but in this way. Power-to-X, on our way to Paris, to the Paris Agreement with PTX. Climate change is real and accelerating, and to keep us within planetary boundaries, the Paris Agreement requires us to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees. And greenhouse gas emissions must be curbed. And thus, to reach Paris in time, we need massive increases on 3 dimensions. First, energy efficiency. We have to further increase dramatically. Second, we need a huge increase in renewable energy. And then third, we need PTX. All 3, not one after the other, all simultaneously. I have only 10 minutes, so I have to be quick. The PTX formula, you said X is the unknown. I rather call it S4F. PTX means using additional renewable power, solar, wind, hydro, etc., to split water into its components, oxygen and hydrogen. I think most people have now understood how that goes. And then hydrogen can further be synthesized and refined by adding either carbon dioxide or nitrogen, and nitrogen seems to be the favorite option for Morocco, to produce what I call S4F, sustainable, and then the 4 Fs are fossil-free fuels and feedstocks. And they are mainly needed in hard-to-abate sectors of both industry and transport, which cannot easily be defossilized or electrified and by renewable energy directly or by batteries. So they really need, in addition to green electrons, also green molecules. And therefore, my point is the current debate often stops at H2, at hydrogen. We should go the extra mile. To be sustainable, this hydrogen must stem from additional renewable energy, because otherwise it undermines the power shift towards renewables. Then it's simply replaced by coal or gas. But by going the extra mile beyond hydrogen towards S4F, the options for use and the added value creation increase significantly. And that is of economic interest also. Now, of course, the carbon source, which should, if possible, come from direct air capture, and PTX can then really provide carbon neutral feedstocks and fuels for industries and transport. Now, very much the debate in Germany is driven by Germany's and Europe's import needs. Therefore, my claim is country priorities should come first. Countries should develop their SWOT analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats from their national perspective, and then develop their national hydrogen or even better PTX strategy. And Morocco is well underway. Europe, the EU, Germany, Chile, and others have already set up their strategy, and I understand that the Moroccan one will come soon in the beginning of next year. Plus, you have to design a PTX roadmap with measurable targets and timelines, and these should be aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 and the Paris NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. So the national policy should really be driven by your national opportunities, priorities, and needs. But of course, in addition to that, and I'm coming from the International PTX Hub, you have to rely, and we should build up partnerships, rely on international cooperation to speed up the transfer of knowledge and for generating mutual benefits in trade and much needed revenues. Now, there is often the so-called hen-egg dilemma. And my message is we have to take care of both, not just the demand side or the supply side. We have to intervene and act on both sides. Really, on the supply side, the investors claim that there is no sufficient solvent demand. And on the demand side, you have the potential customers, such as airlines, for example, who complain that all this is far too expensive. So policy has to act on both sides. And for a breakthrough, really, market mechanisms alone will not be sufficient. I'm an economist. I'm very much in favor of open markets, but without policy intervention, we will not manage. We have to set the regulatory frameworks right. We have to support research and development, and finally to generate financial report in the beginning at least, and on both sides, supply and demand. So moving forward, why do I have that twice? The learning curves, they are decisive. The renewable energy sector, however, provides fantastic lessons of steep learning curves and dramatic cost reductions. Just remember the lesson of solar PV power. In 2005, the cost of 1 watt produced from a PV module was $4. Guess what it's now? 40 cents. And in that period, the capacity of installed solar PV went up from 6,000 megawatt to 600,000 megawatt. And it is not totally excluded, but even possible that we could run down the costs for modular electrolyzer units. We have to do this, but we often think if we say upscaling only in terms of size, but we should also think in terms of upscaling by number through serial production. And that, I think, is a lesson we can learn from other technological breakthroughs, that serial production and increasing number of modules. So now comes the frog. He has to leap. Of course, PTX is offering significant leapfrogging potential for development. And I want to go a step further from Morocco to the rest of Africa. We know that half the population is still not connected to electricity grids. And the population is going to almost double by 2050. So look at what happened in telecommunications. Africa leapfrogged the era of copper-wired fixed cable networks. They will never go that way again. Let's imagine, is this also possible in the energy sector without transmission grids? That's where PTX might come into the game, and then not in the one standard way, but in different technological perspectives. So that will also, we talk about empowerment. Power has a double meaning. We talk about technology, but we also talk about political power, empowerment of rural communities, etc. So now PTX exports and logistics we need to handle. And thanks to the abundance of solar and wind potential, Morocco is well placed. Other countries in Latin America, like Chile, but also the former fossil fuel exporters like the Gulf states or Russia might become important players in this new global market, and that will have major geopolitical consequences. Morocco really is entering a new game there. But it's essential that we think about the implications for infrastructure, endowment, and logistics. We had that in the previous session, and it sounded very optimistic. I think it needs significant attention to really get it right and to think about the different transport options. EESG, we know ESG is economic, social, and governance aspects in sustainability assessments. I add a second E because I think the economic dimension of sustainable development matters crucially. But there will be no global market without compliance with comprehensive sets of sustainability standards and criteria. We need to establish them. Impact assessments on a broad range of sustainability concerns, economic, environmental, social, and governance are crucial. And supply chain due diligence at every step of the value chain, at every level, from the local project up to the national programs and the international, even call it planetary perspectives. Last point, PTX for PA and SDGs, all abbreviations, but you know what it's about. PTX is offering really bright perspectives for achieving the Paris Agreement. Without PTX, it won't work, and for contributing to sustainable development goals. There are good chances for broad support of a PTX agenda by a whole range of stakeholders who often tend to disagree, from business to industry to labor organizations, but also environmental NGOs. If we get those interests well aligned and from a wide range of countries, industrialized, emerging, and developing countries in the north and in the south, I really see the potential here. And therefore, our international PTX hub is standing ready as an international platform facilitating dialogue, transfer of knowledge, and joint action. And that's why I'm here. And I invite you to continue the debate, but I'm happy that I have the chance to address you, catalyzing green hydrogen and PTX solutions on a global scale. That's our mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heino, for your insights and thoughts about PTX. So many rich ideas. So I can try to summarize some of the main insights you gave us. So first, I hear that the Paris Agreement's goals cannot be achieved without taking into account the PTX alongside the energy efficiency and renewable energy development. You call for fossil-free fuels and feedstock development that need what you call the extra mile beyond hydrogen, with integrating nitrogen and CO2 for PTX derivatives, and in a manner that allows for decarbonizing also non-electrifiable economy. That's what I hear from your thoughts. There is no place for copy pastes, as I understand. Each country has to roll out its own strategy, taking into account its own context and the geopolitics that you said will be important for the whole industry. We hear that demand and supply will have to be both addressed in parallel. That there is a long learning curve to we have to give time to time, and probably it's a long decade struggle of everyone to have this PTX completely on the rails and brought to high scale developments. I hear that there is a big opportunity for developing countries. It's not only an issue for developed countries, it's also an opportunity for developing countries, and you have similarity with the telecommunication development in such countries. And finally, I hear also that infrastructure planning will be a big issue, as well as territorial planning, considering the needs of flows and also the geopolitics of such developments. Thank you very much, Heino. So I will give the floor to Saïd Moulin. Saïd.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Saïd.
We have about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I will try to manage 5 minutes just to give some information about how our country, and I'm very glad, thank you very much for the organizers for organizing this World P2X Summit today, especially during this pandemic time. It's really a chance for the organizers, but also for all of us to see that there is optimistic view for the tomorrow and for the future of the next generations. We are glad because also when we're talking about hydrogen, but also what we saw these last years, and just last year in Madrid, we are all together during this event, during the COP25, linked to hydrogen, and we were looking at how things are going. To answer the question about the timeline, of course, today more than 95% of the hydrogen is produced and consumed is gray hydrogen. We want to have this green hydrogen. And one thing is that a country like Morocco, as it was mentioned this morning, we had this vision since 10 years now, giving huge opportunities. With renewable, with energy efficiency, we managed to have a policy for reducing our energy dependence, for reducing our emissions, but also for developing industries and for developing projects that can have all the impacts, environmental impacts, economical impacts, and social impacts. We should not forget the industry in this field. Since 2016, AME is the Moroccan Agency for Energy Efficiency, has been the public agency in charge of implementing the government energy efficiency policy to reduce the country's energy dependence. And we were under the supervision of the Ministry of Energy and Mines and Environment. Just last March, AME missions has been extended to include the development of sustainable mobility and clean industrial production in the country, beside its historic mission in energy efficiency in industry, buildings, transport, agriculture, and cities. The agency is now under the supervision of the Ministry of Industry, Trade, Green, and Digital Economy. And you heard this morning the Minister of Industry, Trade, Green, and Digital Economy giving some message, because industry is concerned. Industry is concerned by hydrogen because we will have many projects to develop. We can think about fuel cells, we can take our electrolyzers, and many projects that can be developed in the industry in our country. Trade is concerned. The trade of green hydrogen will be really a key issue, and all the legislation for that has to be developed. And of course, the green economy. And when we talk about green economy today, we have 3 axes. Of course, still the energy efficiency. And energy efficiency is also going to be developed also with hydrogen, green hydrogen. You mentioned, we heard this morning OCP mentioning, and I think it will be the first project in the Moroccan context talking about green ammonia. OCP wants to be carbon neutral in 2040. The main mission for the agency is that all the industry in Morocco should be concerned by carbon neutral, to be carbon neutral in the future. And the main mission asked from the ministry is to start with different industries, and the automotive industry also has a huge program to be carbon neutral in the next years. With energy efficiency, with renewables, with biomass for heat, but also with hydrogen tomorrow. All those fields can be concerned just to reach those objectives of neutral carbon. As you know, the EU carbon border tax is on the way, and the industry is really concerned by that. And that's why we believe to be coherent in our policy. We have a policy giving priority to renewable energy and energy efficiency in our energy policy. But also, to be coherent, we have to stop subsidizing fossil fuel. It's the same to reach those objectives and to have the timeline shorter when you have this coherence in your policy. We are glad that today, and we heard this morning, all the actors and all the points that can be used for hydrogen, energy storage, sustainable transport is one of the new axes for the agency. And we heard, and we follow what's going on with the hydrogen for transport, for heavy transport, for train, for buses, for trucks. And I think those products are already available today in the market, and they can be implemented step by step, of course, as soon as we have this green hydrogen produced at a good price. Of course, the last point for me, the decarbonizing industry is the main objective. And in this field, hydrogen will play a role, as I mentioned, for ammonia, for OCP, but for the industry, we can think about having this, as it was mentioned by Professor Van Meyer. We saw what happened in the solar PV in the last 10 years, how the price were decreasing, and how we can have the same things in this new sector linked to green hydrogen. We believe that also because of those policies developed in different countries, and especially in Germany, in France, in Spain, in Portugal, we heard this morning, and all what's going on in Europe is really concerning us, because we believe that we can play a role. The Kingdom of Morocco is ready politically, as you mentioned, as you heard this morning, is ready economically and technically, because we have this experience of 10 years of policies implemented in renewable energy, in energy efficiency. And I'm sure that with all those points, and AME now is in charge of the green economy, and we can look at all the support for industries, for implementing projects, are here today, included in the green economy, and to help all actors to implement their projects. Last point, thank you to Irène for also talking about R&D in this field, and to look at how young people, especially the next generation, can be really focusing on smart projects, on quick and I would say projects that can be just developed with universities. And I'm really pushing the young people to be more and more concerned to look at how this field of hydrogen can be developed in our country. Thank you very much, and I hope that I managed to have those 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Said, for this very short and rich summary of what about your ideas about the ecological development of Morocco. And I think it's clear hearing you that it was a smart move to have a government agency in charge of green economy as a whole, to bring in coherence and holistic approach to the public policy in this regard, and making sure that the example of OCP can be spread out in different industries in Morocco, using the PTX developments and also all the other developments in renewable energy efficiency. Thank you, Saeed. So, I will now give the floor to Dr. Schiel from VDA, the German Association of Automotive Industry. Dr. Schiel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President El Hadi. Dear ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, I feel honored to be invited to the World P2X Summit and to talk to you on the market perspectives from the perspective of the automotive industry branch, which is when it comes to a possible use of P2X fuels in any regard, maybe one of the major players of a future market. And I will share with you a few insights from our point of view and explain to you on where we stand with regards to the market and also to technologies which we see and the regulatory background which we need in order to bring P2X to success. Let me start with talking a little bit about the relationship between electric mobility and PTX, because as you know, electric mobility is one of the major instruments with regards to our long-term goal of achieving a climate neutral transport sector in 2050. The automotive industry is strongly working on electrifying powertrains and in bringing attractive models of battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and hybrids to the market. However, not all transport needs can be fulfilled in the medium and long term, particularly in every regard with electrified technologies alone. There is a necessity of gases or liquid renewable fuels like hydrogen or e-fuels which need to be ramped up, and it depends on where the energy demand stands, and it depends on what kind of technology we are talking about, where the relevant uses are. So if you look here from short range about medium range to long range, and from light duty to heavy duty, on where the relevant market shares are and where the relevant needs are, starting with the passenger cars until up to heavy duty cars and ship and air transport as well. This is one dimension. The other dimension is the size of the current fleet. The total fleet right now in Europe is around 240 million cars. We have 2 million new cars being registered each year, and even if in 2040 every second new registered vehicle and afterwards every vehicle is a battery electric vehicle, we will only see a very slow replacement of the total vehicle stock, and it will take, even if we assume this very fast pace of electrification, which is not, which cannot be taken for granted, it will take until after 2050 until the entire fleet would consist of battery electric vehicles. So this shows that the internal combustion engine still for some time has a role to play, and this is why we have to look at perspectives on how to defossilize also the internal combustion engine. And this will be much easier when you look at low load, short range and mid-range mobility, and it will be a lot more complicated or even impossible if you look at high load and long range mobility, to heavy trucks, to buses, and to full size passenger cars, where electrification is much more of a challenge or even impossible compared to other drivetrain technologies. And this is where hydrogen and this is where e-fuels can finally kick in. Now, there's, of course, the argument going on the efficiency of the total energy energy chain, which of course, if you look at the whole efficiency from the primary energy source until the final use for propulsion, there it is of course correct that the use of P2X technologies, taking a German renewable energy source, is around 15%, which is not very good compared to other energy transformation chains. But if you look at other parts of the world where there's much more sun or much more wind, and the possibility to harvest renewable energy is much better. For example, in North Africa, you have 3 times more energy from solar radiation per square meter compared to Germany, in particular northern Germany. And if you harvest this renewable energy, then the overall efficiency quota is much better, for around 45% throughout the whole energy transformation chain, which of course makes it very efficient to look also at the chain of transforming this renewable energy into hydrogen and maybe into e-fuels and transport them finally to places of use elsewhere in the world. Of course, and this chart looks a little bit complicated in the first regard, but it's very simple to look in the second regard. Of course, if you look at the price of crude oil pumped out of the ground is much more cheaper and will for a long time be much more cheaper than other renewable carbon sources, or even power to liquid, or other renewable fuels. So for a long time being, we will see 2 things. We will first see a steep reduction through economies of scale. We have independent studies for 2030 showing that the cost in euro per liter diesel equivalent can move down to up to 1.2 or maybe 2 euro per liter diesel equivalent in 2030 when it comes to e-fuels, for example, P2X. In the current price corridor, and even move much lower with a perspective to 2050, well below 1 euro per liter diesel equivalent. However, we will need for some time to go additional support measures, incentive measures, and investment support measures in order to rebalance the cost disadvantage of these technologies, which of course accrue and which of course have to be taken on board if we want to achieve the positive climate effect of these technologies. So what we look at, and this is the comparison with regard to the target given by the European Renewable Energy Directive in 2030, we have to look at a couple of different instruments to tackle in order to be able to mitigate the situation. The first is change of energy taxation. So we should not consider energy density anymore. This is an approach from the old fossil world, but we should consider the CO2 footprint of the energy carriers as the basis for future taxation, which of course then really helps climate-friendly technologies like P2X and e-fuels into the market. The second is we need specific market introduction programs which help to alleviate the very high need for investment, the very high capital need for erecting the relevant production facilities to be able to produce P2X liquids and P2X energy carriers. And then on a European scale, we need really a thorough revision of the Renewable Energy Directive in a couple of dimensions. Let me name 4 dimensions. The first dimension is ambitious goals with regards to renewable fuels. 23% is what we are talking about. Then we need a minimum quota of 5%, which is specifically reserved to hydrogen and e-fuels, because these are the specifically interesting technologies when it comes to achieving climate neutrality also in the fuel sector. Then we have to look at delegated acts which have to define the grid connectivity of the power supply and sustainability criteria, because of course we want also our international partners to be able to produce these fuels on a sustainable basis. Otherwise, we will not meet acceptance in the international markets. And this is what we know from our international partners in many countries, which is very important also to possible countries of production. Then, of course, we need a delegated act which defines the GHG methodology of hydrogen and e-fuels in order to really make the case for the greenhouse abatement potential of these technologies in order to make them certifiable, to make them measurable, and finally also to make them tradable. So this is what we have to look at in the long-term perspective. So if we say that the future is electrified in the long term, the future can be electrified in multiple ways. One way is the direct use in electric cars, like here with a plug, but another way is, of course, to use e-fuels, which can be hydrogen or which can be from liquid nature being poured into internal combustion engine. Both ways have their specific value, and we will need each and every technology in order to achieve our long-term vision, which is the most important lever for all, the long-term vision of having climate neutral transport in 2050. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Schiel. It was interesting to hear you as the mobility sector is, as you know, I mean, one of the most fossil fuel consuming industries. So I understand from your thoughts and insights that the electric vehicle development is a heavy trend. It is on the way, on the run, but it's not a quick change. It's a long-term change, and the fleet cannot be 100% changed in a few years. It's a multi-decade issue, and therefore you're bringing the necessity of not working only on electric vehicle, but also on feeding combustion engine powered vehicles by liquid or gaseous green fuels, which is interesting to hear, and could be also one of the levers of development of PTX the development. We hear that it's interesting also to see your figures about the PTX efficiency depending on the locations, which is also coherent with what Mr. Vormeyer said earlier. Location is an issue here, and it's interesting to hear that efficiency in North Africa would be 3 times that of Germany. And finally, you make recommendation about public policy adaptation in Europe, and with the main topics would be taking into account the CO2 footprint as a base of taxations, which sounds like a very important point, and also adopt more ambitious objectives in general for the transformation that is going on. Thank you very much, Dr. Schiel. I will move on now to Mr. Samuel Alt. Maybe I made a mistake in his current occupation. Mr. Alt is a Senior Director of Energy Policy at Siemens AG. So, Mr. Alt, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, President Al-Hidi. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you can hear me well and see the slides. Thank you very much for setting up this honorable conference and also for inviting Siemens Energy to participate in it. Please allow me very shortly to introduce my company. Although I trust that all of you heard the name Siemens before, it might possibly come as a surprise to you that Siemens Energy is a fairly young company now that has just been fully spun off of the Siemens AG and founded on the stock markets less than 10 weeks ago. So we are quite old, but we are, in other terms, almost a baby, as you can say. And as you can see on the slide, it's a company with probably the broadest energy technology portfolio that you can find in the world. And most certainly, it's also the company with the widest power to X portfolio, starting from wind generation from our colleagues from Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energies, over to electrolysis as the core of the power to X economy. I would say that you can see in the new energy business field. We're having compressors for pressurizing in transport, hydrogen, as well as utilization topics such as hydrogen-ready gas turbines in our generation divisions. So all in all, a broad portfolio, but I don't want to give too many details now, as our CEO of Siemens Energy Morocco, Nadia Hakanson, my distinguished colleague, will elaborate on the power to X capabilities of Siemens a little bit more in depth in the following session 3. And I really want to try to stick to my 5 minutes so that we're going to have a viable discussions later on as well. So let me come now to the main question of our panel today. Is there a global power to X market? And I'm totally with Heino saying it's a clear no at the moment. Or in putting it in other words, as you can see on the slide here, it is a wheel that is not turning yet, or at least it's turning at a very slow speed, right? In my personal role, as President El Hadi pointed out rightly, I'm at Siemens Energy Government Affairs, and it's actually my job talking to our management and experts internally, as well as customers and also the government externally. So the objective of my job really day to day is clearly to make this giant gear of a global power to X market to contribute towards making it move, right? And I want to share with you today a personal experience that I have gathered so far as a gearbox designer, right? And I want to share with you how I can imagine this gearbox that making our wheel turn. Well, each market clearly requires an offtake. This is currently the main barrier to market development, but I come to this in a second. Market also needs supply with hydrogen and synthesis, and also all derivatives that we are talking about today and that we've been hearing a lot about, such as methanol or ammonia. And obviously, we also need the infrastructure linking both. However, I'm also with Heimo saying that we need to really address both the chicken and the egg and really drive together both of them at the same time. But I think our gearbox needs a lot more wheels and gears to make it turn really, right? I mean, if we look at the bottom left, we need the renewable energy generation. And I'm also with Heimo that it should be additional renewable energy sources here, right? For the synthesis, we need the CO2. A very important role really plays for the technology development, the pilot projects that we are currently thinking about in many countries and trying to really develop them. Because with the pilot projects, we learn more about the technology, about the degradation of the materials, and then we can also kind of invent new, more efficient electrolysis generations and scale them up in gigafactories, really to drive costs down and go down on this cost curve, as Heino also mentioned, like the renewable in the past 2 decades, right? So the infrastructure doesn't work without the finance doesn't work without the bankability, and obviously the offtake also kind of we see it mostly in industry, but also we are very close with everything that Kurt Christian mentioned today in the mobility sector, which is very, very promising to us, because here you really have in the short term the possibility to use current infrastructures, current fleets to blend in synthetic fuels, and you have a very high readiness to pay for the CO2 avoidance in this sector, and you don't have any international competition in the street mobility, where you would harm kind of industries if you now give an ambitious target to the sector. However, what's probably most relevant to make this gearbox now turn is inductions by the government, really getting traction onto the gears. How could they do that? They definitely need to go via regulation, as you can see here on the right, regulating kind of the offtake sectors, giving laws and legislations to those sectors that give a certain quota as a target, and also enable those sectors to give the additional costs that are at the beginning quite high, because we are just at the beginning of the cost learning curve, but give those costs also to the end customers, so that they contribute their share towards the decarbonization. What we also need here in the middle, and also Heino touched upon this, is the certification. We certainly need sustainability criteria, CO2 certifications of the fuels, and definitely we also need the public funding here on the top left sector that is really required to kick off the pilot projects. And I think Germany as well as Morocco are on a very good track here. In Morocco with first piloting the small projects and then financed also by the German government and orchestrated and conducted by Masen, really the large-scale demonstration projects for Power-to-X that we all need so urgently. So in a nutshell, it's nothing different really. What Heino and many others are saying are the ingredients, the components. It's just a new way of showing it from my personal experience, how we need to really set up these gears and adjust the gears in order to make this wheel turn. And I'm looking forward to a discussion, and I hope I stayed in my time, really discussing with you what are your gears, additional gears that might be missing still, or other gears that you see differently, and really exchanging on that. And thank you very much for participating, and looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Alt. So we understand that the technology is there. It has to be scaled up. Costs must be brought down, and that comes out of many, broad efforts from all stakeholders, but mainly governments that have to induct the whole thing by public funding, regulations, and certification. And you mentioned the pilot projects and the importance of the pilot projects for such developments. And I hear you also about the offtake barrier, which can be one of the questions that we can raise after the last interventions. Thank you, Mr. Alt. Let me now give the floor to Mrs. Hanan Hamraoui from HDF France.
Hello, everyone.
The floor is yours. Thank you.
Can you hear me correctly? Great.
Perfect.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me as a speaker to this World Power-to-X Summit. As a conclusion to the presentation from my colleagues and to open up to our discussion later, I would like to introduce what we can do if hydrogen has an IPP, to use it for power generation. And I am going to talk directly on what HDF is doing in this hydrogen market to give some concrete projects that we are developing, enable you to see with new perspective for Power-to-X as a green power generation, as introduced by Professor Van Meyer a few minutes ago. And I completely agree with Gearbox presented by Samuel as well. And I would like to show you with my presentation how we can make this Gearbox working in order to build a Power-to-X project. Just next slide, thank you. As we see during this first session, hydrogen has an energy vector, is back in fashion. Can you hear me correctly now? Okay. I can. All right, okay, thank you. So I said that hydrogen as an energy vector is back in fashion to its potential to support the transition to a decarbonized energy system required to meet the emission reduction goals. Indeed, hydrogen is used in industry for more than 100 years and has various advantages that has been mentioned several times this morning, and I'm not going to come back on those points. So in HDF, we are focusing on one of the opportunities that is the power generation. So we can use the hydrogen as a carrier for massive energy storage. So this is what I'm going to present you now. If you can just move to the second slide. Thank you. Can you move to the second slide? Thank you. HDF is a French company located in Bordeaux area. Currently, we are split into two different business units. On one hand, HDF Energy is an IPP. So we develop a multi-megawatt power plant producing stable and non-polluting electricity day and night, thanks to renewable energies and their massive storage, mainly in the form of hydrogen. We call this kind of power plant renew-stable for renewable and stable. And to realize this renew-stable power plant, HDF needs to use a large-scale hydrogen component from electrolyzer to fuel cell. We made the decision 3 years ago to define and to integrate the supply of the fuel cell under the name of HDF Industry. This is the second business unit part of HDF. We are a supplier of the most strategic brick of the future large hydrogen infrastructure, so the high-power fuel cell. These fuel cells are currently produced individually, and thanks to its assembly plant in France, HDF will industrialize this strategic equipment, standardize them to drastically reduce their costs and significantly increase their reliability. So the HDF plant will be the first in the world to produce high-power fuel cell, adapted in terms of performance and cost to the energy storage and also the mobility market. Can you move to the second slide? Thank you. As everyone knows, solar and wind energy has been competitive for a long time and have many advantages, like carbon-free, easy to develop and install, but they have technical limits, so they are intermittent, and only few can be installed on the electrical network in several countries. Our solution that is presented here on the slide address this problem by developing a stable, dispatchable power supply. So the so-called renew-stable projects combine an intermittent source of energy, solar or wind, with a large capacity of storage based on hydrogen. So we have electrolyzer, hydrogen tanks, and then the fuel cell to reproduce electricity after. This megawatt scale renew-stable project we are developing in several regions in the world in direct competition with diesel generators. And we can provide clean and stable energy to the grid for a better price than a diesel power plant. The expansion of the model and the ramping up of the hydrogen industry will decrease the capex, and we can say that we are already competing with the heavy fuel and the LNG power plant. One example is our first project called SEOG, is the world's first multi-megawatt hydrogen power plant in French Guiana, for which construction work will start by the end of this year, with an investment of more than 100 million euros, entirely private fund. The partner for this private fund is Merijam and Sahara, the refinery in Martinique. We have partnered with McPhy for building of 16 megawatt electrolyzer and Siemens Energy that are on the table here, that will be the EPC of the power plant. So this kind of project show you a perspective to use the hydrogen to produce electricity at demand, and that will be dispatchable and firm and stable. So 24/7 green power production. To the next slide, sorry. Just here, a quick slide to show you that we have started to work in 2016 on the technology part with Ballard Power System, the Canadian stack fuel cell supplier. we have built a partnership with them to co-develop 1.5 megawatt fuel cell. And this fuel cell will be used for our energy project, but also in other application, has maritime application, for instance. And we have developed also a partnership with ABB Marine International to put together our effort in the industrialization of this large-scale fuel cell for this marine application. And on the last slide, what I wanted to show you is the first application of this kind of fuel cell. So the project called ClearGen in French island Martinique, with Sarah as a partner and also Ballard Power System. This project show you another application of the hydrogen. We can use the hydrogen co-produced by the refinery, and we recover this hydrogen to generate electricity and to inject into the grid. So this project has been launched in December 2019, and this is the first fuel cell that is CE certified and with 1 megawatt PEM fuel cell and designed for an industrial use for more than 15 years lifetime. So this kind of project can show you as well that we are going from demonstrated program to industrial use. And I wanted to show you here that on a market perspective, we can, it is very time, there is a lot of pilot project that has been launched. And I believe that today we need to move now to industrial project and to achieve a scale up to have the market running correctly. And the last thing I wanted to say is that the Kingdom of Morocco is a pioneer in renewable energy. And this renewable energy program was a real showcase for the whole world, first of all, because of its anticipatory vision, but also because of the demonstration of its very good implementation for many years. And I believe that with the exceptional natural resources at your disposal and your vision on the energy mix, the development of the hydrogen infrastructure can represent a real opportunity for the kingdom. We are developing now an R&D project with Irezen, SOMAS, also the Moroccan storage company, and the Spanish gas TSO Enagás, to build underground storage for hydrogen, because we believe that we are talking about production of the hydrogen, we are talking about the end user, the offtake, as we can be HDF to produce electricity, but we need also that the infrastructure and the storage ready, as Samuel explained, like all this gearbox has to be ready to implement correctly the market. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very good summit to everybody. I look forward to have the opportunity to meet you soon to make project move ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanan, for your presentation. So we can see that there are already some real projects with the hydrogen in the power sector. And I hope they're not only pilot projects, and I think there are real projects with PPAs. Let me just say that Dr. Uwe Lal, unfortunately, probably had a connection challenge, so he unfortunately cannot join us. Would have been interested to hear local government's view from Germany, but we'll move on to the Q&A session, and let me stay with this first with this issue of new projects, how to foster such new projects and make them feasible, which brings me to the issue of offtake and the feed-in tariffs, a question that can be addressed to Hanan Hamraoui, but also to any of the panelists that wants to respond. We have seen in the past that the PV development was quick and the cost were brought down dramatically, but this was mainly in the beginning, back in 15, 20 years ago, to generous feed-in tariffs that were granted for PV production. Do you think that this notion of feed-in tariffs and offtakes with feed-in tariffs can be, a real lever for hydrogen developments alongside with the carbon tax lever. Maybe Hannah, if you want to respond, and any other panelists. Who would like to take this one? We can't hear you, Samuel.
Okay, yes, I can certainly go ahead with this question. Happy to take it. Well, I think at the moment we have to ask ourselves who should really finance this market uptake and this cost regression curve. And there is basically two general options. One is that we get it mostly funded by the governments, which then gonna incorporate CAPEX, OPEX funding, and a lot more, and will be very comprehensive. Or we try to find markets where the readiness to pay for the CO2 reduction is significantly high, and then we get it out of this market. And we see kind of introducing quotas, for instance, for synthetic fuels in the transport sector, but also in the aircraft sector, as well as in other sectors, as a very promising way to really introduce those fuels. But maybe Christian Scheel wants to elaborate a little bit on this as well.
Well, I of course can, because the question of feed-in tariffs is one which is complementary to other regulatory measures with regards to the question of fuels. And we have to look, because we have to look on one side, on the supply side, and the supply side is the side where feed-in tariffs play a very important role, particularly in Germany and many other European jurisdictions. And on the other hand, we have the demand side. On the demand side, we have to see a variability of instruments. I have shown some of them in my presentation, which have to enable a price competitiveness with regards to PTX technologies and PTX fuels from a user's perspective. And in our case, in the case automotive industry, it's the driver who finally has to choose these fuels at the pumping station, and has to find a competitive price for the final product. So both things have to go together in order to really provide for a fast ramp up.
I can add one point, is that I believe that, of course, feed-in tariff can be one of the solutions, but as we saw, some industries are already in almost economical. I think about refineries, I think about ammonia production, I think about maybe steel industry, who can use hydrogen in a matter that it is almost already economic in the next few years. We should not wait until 2030 for some applications, but for others, yes, of course, we will need to wait that the price should go down.
A question linked to this. Well, obviously, we are all waiting for this massive scale up to bring down the costs. And I think everyone agrees that the regulations will be very important to reach this point, in terms of carbon tax, in terms of CO2 footprint, maybe feed-in tariffs, funded by government budget. In which timeline do you think this will happen? I mean, we need these regulations to be set up to enable the scale up and to enable prices to be brought down in a lever. As Mr. Scheel shows with the chart, at the level that can allow green molecules to compete with the conventional fuels, fossil fuels and feedstock. Which timeline? What is, in your view, the timeline that we will have for such developments in terms of regulations? Mr. Vollmeyer, maybe?
Well, I don't have the magical date to announce. However, we are experiencing currently a situation in which huge political decisions with major financial implications are taken almost every week. Due to the pandemic, we are seeing recovery programs of unprecedented order. And the issue is we really need to ensure that these funds don't lock us into a fossil future. And there, I think really a lot is needed to carefully analyze to what extent we are setting our economies and energy systems on the right pathway. So in addition, I think what was mentioned already, we are spending billions to save airlines, and why not make those support programs at least conditional with a time frame in which these companies commit to also embark on a green pathway. That would not be economically unthinkable, because in the end it's the customer who will pay, but the increase in flight tickets prices would be not that dramatic if we start with certain blending mandates, not to call it quota.
Thank you. Dr. Schild, do you have something to add in this regard?
Yes, because this was a very important point that Heiner von Meyer made. From our point of view, the answer is the earlier the better, because looking at the huge investment needs, at the huge capital needs which are at hand, we have to take decisions which provide for a clear and stable regulatory framework really early. And the Renewable Energy Directive has to be transposed in European member states right now. And this is why we are discussing and asking for a very stable and very long-term and a strong quota there, as I've developed before. First and second, on a European scale, we really need to enhance the regulatory framework on the taxation side, on the quotation side, also on a tariffing side, so that investors really find a long-term stable framework to ramp up these technologies, so they're at hand in the relevant quantities and in a long-term stable way when we move towards climate neutrality in the transport sector.
Thank you. Maybe I can ask you another question relative to your intervention. You talked about this necessity of green molecules to fuel combustion engine powered vehicle. We understand that necessity, and I think it's something very important to take into account. But do you think such development of feeding conventional combustion engine cars with green fuels, do you think in the long term may affect or compete with the development of EVs?
Well, on a technological scale, of course, this is always a search for the better solution. And probably in the long term, the answer will be that for a large part of transport problems, electrification and electric vehicles will be the priority solution, in particular when it comes to passenger cars. But there will be transport modes and transport solutions which are hard to electrify or which can only be partly electrified, like with plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, where you also have an internal combustion engine in the car. And or if you look at heavy-duty transport, at long-haul transport, very long distances, and so on. And for these transport solutions, we of course have to look at defossilized internal combustion engines as well, and there P2X comes into play. And if we talk about a decarbonized transport sector, we talk of zero carbon, and zero carbon means that we have to have good solutions and technologically viable solutions for all transport modes and all transport sectors. And this is why we we very well see a long-term perspective for P2X.
Thank you, Dr. Schiel. Finally, we addressed during this session, we talked about several segments. We talked about mobility, we talked about industry, and also housing. What do you think would be the segments that will be the most disruptive, that will help really strong and decisive change and transformation with regard to leaving the fossil fuel economy towards the green molecules economy and green electricity economy? Who would like to respond? Mr. von Meyer, maybe?
Well, I will not single out individual industries or transport sectors. I think it was a crucial decision by many countries, the EU Commission exactly a year ago, to go for a carbon neutral zero scenario by 2050. Until then, I think many sectors thought that they would manage to get through the remaining loophole. Yeah? Let the others adjust. We will manage to escape through the back door. I think since the carbon neutrality decisions, it is clear for every sector that they have to get carbon neutral in a very short period of time. So they are all under enormous pressure, and top managers have that on their desks. So I really think let's see the competition play this out. And I'm pretty confident that we will see interesting developments. My message was, let's strengthen international cooperation. That was perhaps the only gear I was missing in the fantastic Siemens gearbox. I really like that. And by exchanging our experiences, I think we in Europe tend to underestimate the enormous potential which this conference reveals, what's going on in Morocco. But there are other countries, even within sub-Saharan Africa. Let's really generate those ideas. I think that's what will create the momentum.
Thank you.
I can add one point, is because I believe
yes,
at the same time that, of course, some industries will be very, very quickly interested in those applications. Transport. In 1992, with the Ministry of Energy, we went to visit the BMW site in Munich, and we saw the first car using hydrogen. And at this time, we were discussing about when it will arrive. And we said maybe in the next 20 years, depending on the price of oil. Now it's really linked to two things. Of course, the economy, but also the environmental point. We need to reach those objectives linked to the Paris Agreement. We need to reach this carbon neutral industry. And I believe that that's why the mission of the agency today is really linked to that. We'll have both industries, some industries that are very quick win, and also some transport. I know in Germany you have a train running on hydrogen already since 1 year almost. So we also saw that trucks, maybe not cars, but trucks will be using hydrogen very soon, because the technology is maybe better than electrical ones. So in some cases, we'll have some project that can help implement step by step. In the next 10 years, I hope that we'll manage to reach those economic point linked to what some experts are saying, that in 2030, the green hydrogen will be cheaper than the gray hydrogen in the next 10 years. So having all this in mind, we can think about, to answer your questions, dear Hadi, dear Said, it's that we look at where are the opportunities, where are the quick wins, and then where we can go further. Thank you.
Thank you, Said. So,
Can I just add something?
Hanan, you had a comment?
Yes, sorry, just a few minutes before I had a problem with my connection, so I couldn't answer your question. I just have a comment regarding for the market for the Power-to-X and which timeline as well. So I believe, as my colleague said, that I think it's come from the industry, like the decarbonization of the industry is a key element, but those industry, they are not going to take green hydrogen if it's not at the cost. So the cost has to be 1.5 euro kilo. That is a cost that we can hear, and we believe. And when we see the national strategy that there are in place, what happened? Okay. You can hear me now. When we see the national strategy that there are ongoing in France, in Germany, and now also in Morocco, it comes. It starts with a decarbonization of the industry. So this is the key start. So you can have decarbonization of like a lot of steel industry, like OCP, for instance, in Morocco, but also decarbonization of the electrical grid. This is one topic that is also important. We can see a lot of countries that are still running with thermal power plant, with a coal power plant, and there is a large program to shut down all these power plants in these 10 years that they are going. And we believe that hydrogen can be also a good way to replace this thermal power plant. So in terms of timeline, what we can see with a lot of national strategy and also with the EU strategy, with the Green Deal, is that within 2030, so in 10 years now, there will be enough project, there will be enough hydrogen production with the scale-up that is enabled to reduce the cost of the electrolyzer, for instance. That is the key also element to produce a very with a good cost for the hydrogen. We can see that the initial resource energy, so the solar and the wind, can be now produced at a very good price if we use, for instance, resources as you can have in Morocco. So the electrolyzer, it's really the key element. And thanks to this national strategy, this EU strategy, and the fact, as explained by Samuel, that we come to a production of a gigafactory for electrolyzer that is going to reduce significantly the cost of this technology, we can be able to produce at a very good price the hydrogen. But then after we need as well, and I insist about this, on the infrastructure, on the storage, to be able also to take this hydrogen to this industrial cluster, because this is going to come from the industrial cluster that are going to use hydrogen in a very high volume to reduce significantly also the cost.
Thank you, Hanan. So maybe a last final comment from after Hanan and Said, maybe from those who want to have a final comment. Dr. Scheel or Mr. von Meyer, for 30 seconds, please, for running out of time.
Well, only a brief remark. Don't forget that the acceptance of this new technology will strongly depend on a real serious sustainability assessment along the entire supply chain. Currently, we have all the stakeholders aligned in support, but it's already starting to split and divide. And we will only be credible if we make sure that hydrogen and PTX are really, in the broad sense, not just ecologically sustainable.
Thank you. I know, Dr. Scheel, you wanted to say something. 30 seconds, please. We can't hear you. You're on mute.
The other point is, which I may add to what Heiner von Meyer said, long-term stable framework conditions on a European scale or maybe even on a global scale, because this is what investors need. This is a very capital-intensive business. We need clear perspectives, and this is what we should work on together, and then we can have very good perspectives together. Thank you, and thank you very much for holding this great
conference.
Thank
you, Dr. Scheel. Thank you, Dr. Scheel. Said, you wanted to say a final word?
Just one.
30 seconds, please.
Yeah, when danger grows also that which saves. It's Hölderlin poet who said that, and I believe that hydrogen can also be one of the solutions for the future for the next generations. Thank you.
Thank you all for this very insightful discussion. I see that we have enthusiastic stakeholders from government parties, automotive industry, IPPs, technology providers. So I think everyone is looking forward to speed up this PTX, hydrogen PTX development. And it has to do now with understand the speeding up the regulations, the incentive programs, and not only country by country, but also in a broad manner with international cooperation and international agreements. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your availability and for this interesting discussion. And we can now close the second session. We are almost on time. Thank you. Thank you.
Very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you to all our esteemed panelists. Thank you for a most thought-provoking presentation. I think the conversation really brought forward the collective intelligence that was evident in the panel. So thank you very much for that. We ended the first panel, the high-level opening panel, with a dream, a green dream. Through the second session, we moved to a gearbox, in a sense looking at the engine that will make this green dream a green reality. I think we all appreciated the rigor, the intellectual rigor of our esteemed panelists in the session just now when he came to describing where we currently are and where we can be if we work together to seize the opportunities that are presented by Power-to-X. Of course, it is important to rely on verifiable data, to rely on maps that are adequate, that do not promote misunderstanding. And I think you'll be very interested in joining us again after the lunch break so that we can go even further in our considerations of how to make this green dream a reality. The gearbox that was discussed at the conclusion of the session just now, I wanted to also indicate that when we connect one gear to another, there is a gear ratio. And the gear ratio allows us to increase the speed from one gear to the other or decrease it dependingly. But I want to use this image to really highlight the power of connections and partnership when it comes to working together and unleashing the transformational potential of Power-to-X. So we will resume our summit in about an hour and 15 minutes. That is at 2:30 Rabat time. Thank you for your attention. See you soon.